And now, please welcome to the stage to start the final day of CityLab, Secretary of the United States Department of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg.
Morning. Good morning. Wow. Thank you for the coveted first thing in the morning on the last day of the conference slot. I have never spoken to a group at that time slot that is this energized, so you must have had a great convening so far. I want to thank Mayor Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropies for the opportunity to be here, and I want to thank all of you for your leadership. I was a mayor, as you might know, and back when I was mayor, I believed that local government was the most dynamic and indispensable level at which things get done. When I was a mayor, I believed that to be true. Now that I'm here in Washington, D.C., I know that to be true. On my way here, because my husband Chasten is traveling, I was on drop-off duty, and I was reflecting as I wrangled two twin toddlers into their daycare that parenting is the best and hardest thing you ever get to do. And for, in some ways, similar reasons, I think being a mayor is the best and hardest job in government because so much is at stake, because so much can get away from you, and because it's so rewarding when it goes well. I have the best job in the federal government, which is the opportunity to help shape and protect the means of transportation that get goods and people to where they need to be. But I think the main measure of our success will be whether through our work, your communities thrive. And that's why I'm so excited to be with you and was so pleased to hear about the work that you've been doing these last few days. I take great pride in the structure and the strategy of our grant programs, many of which you have benefited from. For the U.S. mayors who are here, we funded over 31,000 transportation projects and counting. And we're not even halfway through the infrastructure law's 5-year life. And to be clear, none of those projects, not one of those 31,000 projects was invented and cooked up in the U.S. Department of Transportation headquarters. That's not how it works. Our thought is that the ideas, the projects themselves don't come from Washington, but more of the funding should, more of the support should, and a strategy knitting them all together should, in the form of a national policy. And our national policy under President Biden's leadership is to make sure that we use transportation to enhance the things that are most important about how people and goods get to where they need to go. First and foremost, safety, jobs and economic development, climate, equity, and innovation in ways that actually make the right kind of difference for people. And I know that in times like this, there is a lot of pressure on our belief in the ability to get anything done. Certainly, we feel that at the national level. I haven't checked my phone in the last half hour or so, but the last time I did, we didn't have a functioning House of Representatives in this country. We have enormous political division at the national level, and of course at the global level, anguish that is all too close to home for so many right here in the United States. In the face of all those problems, I am firmly convinced that salvation will come from the local. And I see it in the level of trust and the level of focus on getting things done that local leaders have that we want to support. And what I wanted to do with my few minutes with you is just offer up one example of how that dynamic works. And the example I'll give is around what I already mentioned is our department's reason for existing, our top priority at the U.S. DOT, which is safety. We are very proud to be working with cities and towns and counties across America in order to enhance safety on our roads. There is something strange about America's psychology that we rightly have taken every necessary step to make sure that air travel is completely safe, something we don't take for granted and continue working on every day. So much so that a form of travel which involves getting in a metal tube and being propelled by flammable liquids miles above the surface of the ground at nearly the speed of sound is the safest way to get somewhere. It's incredible. If only we had that same level of safety and that same level of expectation for roadway safety. We lose 40,000 people a year in the United States alone to roadway deaths. We lost somebody statistically in the time that I've been on this stage, a 737 full every day. And we can't accept that. And you, I know, don't accept that, and neither do we. I mention this in the context of the power of local action, because I think that's how Vision Zero becomes a reality. We as a department have committed to the policy officially of this country that the only acceptable number of roadway deaths is 0, and we've set about getting there. Many of you have long been champions and advocates of the Vision Zero mentality and strategy, but I will take this opportunity to confess to you that I thought twice and swallowed hard before embracing that goal. Not because it's not obviously a worthy goal, but because as a former mayor who used goals and the ability to set them and then relatively quickly reach them as a way to provide motivational power and political energy around our priorities, I wondered whether 0 seems so far off that there would be a risk of it being demotivating, that some people would scoff, and indeed some people have scoffed and said it's pie in the sky to talk about 0 deaths. But two things convinced me otherwise. First of all, the fact that in other forms of transportation we've done it. Again, the fact that more years than not, we have had 0 fatalities from airliner crashes. But the other thing, the thing that really let me know that it was possible and necessary to embrace the vision of 0, was that even though we couldn't say that it would happen in the United States at a national level next year or the year after that or the year after that, we could see that it had already happened in cities. Nordic cities, some very large ones, like Oslo, that were able to attain at least 1 year with 0 deaths. But since people, especially of my political persuasion, famously point to examples from Nordics that may not be so applicable in the United States, American cities, Hoboken, Jersey City, Edina, Minnesota, Evanston, Illinois, sizable cities, not our nation's capital, admittedly, but sizable cities that actually saw 0 traffic deaths over the course of a year. And when you see that happen, then you're having a completely different conversation. It's one thing to say, how do we get this abstract goal of 0 deaths across the country someday? It's another to say, last year, the biggest American city that had 0 deaths had 50,000 people in it. What if next year, the biggest American city to have 0 deaths had 60 or 70,000 people in it? What if the number of cities that had 0 deaths grew every year? Goals that are still ambitious, but also goals you can get your arms around. And of course, for all of that to work, these goals have to be made real somewhere in particular. That all has to come from the local. But as I said, the resources can't all come from the local. This town has a frustrating history in previous years, and I have to say under previous administrations, of making big promises around infrastructure without results. Obviously that changed. Another source of hope for me. The fact that almost exactly 2 years ago, we're coming up on the anniversary, President Biden signed the bipartisan infrastructure law in a season in which most people thought it was laughable that you could attain a bipartisan anything law besides perhaps a post office renaming. And we got $1 trillion infrastructure deal done in this country. And while I don't want to overlook the many ways in which the job of mayor has become even more demanding and even more difficult since the days when I proudly wore that title, I will say it would have been nice when I was mayor to have $1 trillion infrastructure deal going on in the United States. We were using that to improve roads and bridges, to improve ports and airports, to modernize rail and transit in every part of the country. Many of you are already benefiting from these grants. Some of you, I had a chance to hear about some of the grants you have coming our way. And you should know if you've received something like a RAISE grant, it's an extremely competitive process. So you have a lot to be proud of if you got it. And if you had a project and it didn't make it on the first round, talk to us about how to make it stronger and come back for another round, because we want to say yes as many times as possible. One of the programs where we've been able to say yes to hundreds of communities is Safe Streets for All, a program we're very proud of, where we are funding both implementation and planning. $800 million going directly to communities. And it is important for us to be working directly with communities. We do a lot of work with states, but there is no substitute for the insight, the knowledge, and the priorities that come from the ground up, which is why we wanted to make sure that this program worked directly with the counties, the cities, the towns, the tribes who are ready to put those dollars to work. And I can't wait to see the results that you are going to get with that. And that is how we add in a concrete, tangible way where we won't just one day, someday get to the goal of zero, but be able to say next year that we meaningfully advance the number of Americans who benefited from that vision of zero deaths. That's how we're doing it. Literally putting our money where our mouth is and working side by side with you to help make it happen. So I just wanted to offer that up as an example, but that's just one example. It's true of climate, where global movements of mayors and cities not wanting to wait for their national capitals came together in efforts like the C40 and the climate mayors to make sure that local action added up to global results. High-speed rail is an example where I believe what will really turn the corner is something that we are able to fund with the infrastructure law, which admittedly is not overnight a national high-speed rail network, because we've got a lot of work to do to take care of what we've got. But enough funding to make sure that we see real high-speed rail somewhere in particular in America. I'm convinced that the more Americans actually experience it, even once, the more they will return to their hometowns and say, why can't we have nice things like this? And we'll have more and more support and healthy pressure to get it done. Last thing I want to mention, just to link the everyday work that you are doing to some of the biggest and most weighty and sometimes painful conversations of our time, is I want to echo something the president has often mentioned about the importance of infrastructure to the legitimacy of democracy. And that might sound like a lofty thing to invoke when we're talking about roads and bridges and pipes and internet, but I think if any audience will understand what I mean, it's this one. The measure of a political system is how it can deliver for its people. And when there is a competition between political systems, when there is, for example, a competition over whether a more authoritarian model can better deliver than our messy, pluralistic democratic model, one of the most important proof points of that will be the ability to deliver on the basics. And delivering on the basics is what makes it possible for people to live healthy, fulfilled lives where they spend their time worrying about things like whether their kids are growing up with good values, or whether they're able to grow their business, or whether they're living in line with their faith or their goals, something other than worrying about whether there's an affordable commute to work, or whether the internet's on or not, or whether you can get a glass of clean, safe drinking water. When we take care of the basics, we build trust. And trust is the indispensable element for social as well as political cohesion. And you, as local leaders, are uniquely empowered to help deliver on that, because your work cuts across the information bubbles. One of the best antidotes I've seen to an information bubble is a low-tech thing called a neighborhood. You can cut across the partisan divides and do it in the process of delivering tangible results for the people you live in ways that I am convinced will be our salvation. So after 30 or 40 years of disinvestment from the federal government in local infrastructure needs, I'm here to tell you, yes, we are here from the federal government, and yes, we are here to help. And as we approach I was speaking last night at the National History Museum, and I've recently learned a new word, semi-quincentennial. As we approach the 250th anniversary of this country, which is in 2026, questions will be asked about where we are in the trajectory of this nation. And as we ask those questions, everybody will understand that we've been through a rough decade or so, that leaders, and in particular local leaders, have so skillfully and gracefully managed, navigating everything from profound social and political divisions to a once-in-a-century pandemic shutting down societies. But I really believe by then, and that's not far off, that's the middle of this decade, we're going to be able to say that we are on a positive trajectory. And going a little further down the line, we'll be able to look back to the 2020s and say that we were able to come together and get big things done. But in that, so much will depend on what gets done at the local level. And that's where we are leaning in to our determination to be more user-friendly, more supportive, and to literally put federal money where our mouth is. So thank you again for the chance to be here, and look forward to working with you in every possible way.
And now, the mayor of Reykjavik, Iceland, Dagur Eggertsson, Secretary for Women's Affairs of Bogotá, Colombia, Diana Rodriguez Franco, with reporter at Bloomberg CityLab, Fola Akinnibi.
Well, thank you all. I'm excited to be here and a part of this conversation about the infrastructure of care. So before we dive into that, you guys were polled, and so I wanted to show the results of that. So the question was, do you guys feel like caregivers, children, and others in need of care are top priorities in the city? And it looks like nearly 60% of you guys either say no or you don't know. And so hopefully in our conversation with these folks, there are some things you can take back to your cities. So maybe to start, Mayor, could you tell us a bit about who is providing care in your city and who needs care?
Mm-hmm. Obviously, a lot of people in different ages need care. Traditionally, it has been women that provide care, both off the working market, but also in the working market. So if I look at the statistics, not only in Iceland and Reykjavik, but all over the world, women are the largest caregivers in societies. And to answer the question that we had on the screen, I think we actually have to vote for women and support women as leaders in cities and nationwide to change this.
And Secretary Franco, same question for you.
So indeed in Bogotá, in the capital city of Colombia, a city of 8 million people, over half of us are women. And of those women, 30% perform unpaid caregiving every day, every hour, with an average of 7.5 hours per day, devoted to washing, cleaning, taking care of children, of the elderly in an unpaid fashion. Imagine, 30% of the female population of Bogotá. It's 1.2 million. That's the size of Montevideo. That's the amount of women that devote their lives to unpaid care work. And because of that, they are trapped in time poverty. Mm-hmm. There's never a time to finish high school, never time to go to health checkup, never time for entertainment or for well-being or for income generation. Mm-hmm. So that is a percentage of the people holding our cities and families.
And Secretary, I want to stay with you here. When the administration you're part of took office in 2020, one of the goals and one of the things you guys wanted to do was institutionalize the care system. Can you tell us a bit about what that looks like and where you are now with that process?
Of course. So indeed, in 2020, Mayor Claudia Lopez was the first woman elected mayor to take office. And it had to be beyond just being something symbolic. It had to transform women's lives. And so that's why we decided to create care blocks. In fact, if we can show them on the screen, this is what a care block looks like. A care block is an area of the city, so 100 meters in diameter, that brings together services for three populations: for caregivers, care receivers, and men and their families. Why caregivers? Because we tend to focus on those that require care. And obviously that's very important. But what about caregivers who've sacrificed their lives? They've put their lives on hold to take care of others and to sustain life. And that was the focus we gave to care blocks. We said, let's ask, what is it that women want if they had time? We wanted to address time poverty. And that is what a care block does. It brings together those services women have sacrificed. Like what? Education, well-being services, and income generation. And at the same time, and that's the key of the care blocks, we simultaneously provide care for those they care for in the same vicinity. So we overcome that barrier that women have. They do want to finish high school, they do want employment, they do want to have well-being and free time, but there's no time for them. Who cares for the ones they care for? That's what we do at care blocks. In that same place, we care for the ones they care for, so they have time without feeling guilty to continue their lives that had been placed on pause. And at the same time, very important is that there's care school for men, because we need for everyone, we can all learn to care, and men can learn to care. Let me take you quickly, just so you feel what is the life of a caregiver entering a care block. Let's show the next image. Imagine a woman like Maria. She's 60 years old. She never went to primary school because she was assigned all of that unpaid care burden. So Maria goes into a care block. She can drop off her clothes at a free laundromat instead of washing by hand every day. Then she can drop off her grandchildren at a playful activity. And now she's freed up at least 3.5 hours of her time for herself. Then she can engage in education. She can finish high school regardless of age. She can learn how to use a computer, learn English. Then she can go to bike school for women. We want more sustainable cities. We need more women learning how to ride bikes, but they haven't learned how to do it because they're caring. And then there's always care school for men, so we can all learn to care. That's the life. What happens to Maria is what we want 1.2 million women in Bogotá to live.
And Secretary, quickly, last year in July, you guys had about 10 of these set up. Where are you now, and what's the goal here?
So we're now at 20. A curious fact, we thought during the 4 years we were going to do just 6, but then we realized, and the pandemic hit, the care burden became even more visible, the need to balance care and recognize care more urgent, and so we're now at 20, meaning they're spread out across the city, but we also included care as a guiding principle of urban planning. When you include care and not only environmental factors or mobility factors, as a guiding principle of your cities, then cities can be more proximate. And so what we've planned is that by 2035, the city will have 45 care blocks, guaranteeing that every woman has at least one care block at the most at 30 minutes by foot from their home.
Mayor Eggertsson, I want to come to you. Iceland and Reykjavik have spend a lot of money on childcare, and just to read a stat here, I mean, 96% of children 3 to 5 in Iceland are in an early childhood education program. Now, the OECD average is 83%. In the U.S., we're at about 64%. So you can see how far along the country is. And could you tell us a bit about, I guess, what comes next? What comes after that? What comes after?
Yeah, well, to get to those stats, we needed women leaders. So the woman mayor of Reykjavik that got me into politics actually ran on daycare in '94. And so that is much to her and her peers' credit. But this is not enough. We need to kind of lower the age. So what we are building out now is daycare facilities down to the age of 12 months. So we are bridging the gap between the paid maternal and paternity leave, which is an Icelandic model. So women and men have equal months in maternal and paternity leave, and but that ends after 12 months. So we want daycare to be there at that point. And it's true that it costs much, but I want to bring attention of all that is discussing this in politics back home, that the reason Iceland went from being one of the poorest countries in Europe to one of the richest in 100 years is partly, but a huge part is actually it has found ways, as many other Nordic countries, to make kind of both genders active on the working market. So we have the highest participation on the working market of women in the world, and men, actually. And right now, women are outpacing us in the universities. So 2/3 of everyone in universities in Iceland are women, actually. And this is partly because kind of fundamental system like daycare system has been built out and made affordable. So at the same time as we have been building this out, we have lowered the participation of fees of parents down to around 6% of the total cost. And your second and third child goes there for free. So this is kind of, at the same time we see it as the first level of education, very important for the development of every child, but also as part of kind of an economic program of kind of a welfare country that creates equal opportunity for both genders. But this sounds like a heroic story. We're not there yet. We're putting a lot of money and a lot of efforts in boosting kind of primary education at the universities to get more people into that line of work. We've been raising salaries for care workers in the kindergartens and elsewhere in the last 10 years, so they are equal to other university educations, because we need that, because there's a lack of care workers all over the world, also in the health sector, so we have to keep an eye on this. But not least, it's also about kind of having opportunities to make the most of life, for individuals to take their own decisions, and that's what's great for society, if we can do that. And we're not there yet, but we are going there.
Sure you are.
And Mayor, you've been in office since 2014, and so you're in a different place than the administration secretary Franco is part of, which is leaving office at the end of this year. And so this question is for both of you, but I'll start with you, Mayor. How do you drill this into the fabric of the city so that when you leave office and so when someone else takes over, this remains a priority?
By making this one of the highest priority goals of the new majority we formed last year. We are continuing on this track, both in investing, both in making kindergartens better workplace by kind of redoing the old ones and creating new and nice ones, but also by explaining and giving the reasons why this is important and shouldn't be seen as a soft issue or secondary to something else. Take notice that in Japan, There is a new word for this called womenomics, where the lack of women, educated or not, in the workforce is seen as a huge economic problem for Japan now and to the future. I think that a lot of countries share this same problem. It's much too, I mean, it happens all the time and everywhere that women, with education or not, are not joining the workforce, are not living their dreams, are not participating, creating wealth, following their dreams because of lack of care, lack of political care for those institutions, and a lot of lack of political and public backing in ensuring the finances, the kind of focus on it, and the projects that deliver this. And Claudia Lopez and what you're doing in Bogotá is one of my favorites. So
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you.
And Secretary, your administration is rolling out of office.
Rolling out.
I mean, how do you make sure that they're not unwinding these blocks as the new administration takes office?
So we've taken several strategies. One is we put them in place first. We showed that they could have an impact, and then we turned it into city law. And it was approved unanimously by city council. So it's now a city law. We also needed citizen buy-in. It's at the end, it's citizens who are going to defend these policies. And so we've signed pacts with citizens in the different districts of the city. We've also carried out impact studies to show that this matters. The incoming administrations need figures to show that this proves and has results. So we've carried out impact studies. And we've involved the private sector. Because if there's one thing that 7 billion residents on Earth share, it's the fact that we've all been cared for, and we will probably all care for someone again. And that has to be at the core of understanding care policies. This cannot be, as you said, Mayor, something on the soft side. Care has to be provided in a shared, responsible manner and in a systemic matter. It cannot be the private side on the one end and the public sector on the other and NGOs on the other. We have to think of this as care systems in which we all put our fair share. So involving the private sector in this also gives sustainability, because I also think we have to move from corporate social responsibility to the social responsibility of care.
Thank you so much. It looks like we're out of time, so thank you all.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships pour in, then I watch them roll away again. Ooh, I'm sitting.
Please welcome author and senior leader at Ashoka Innovators for the Public, Sascha Haselmayer. The Emma Bloomberg Associate Professor of Public Policy and Management at Harvard Kennedy School, Elizabeth Linos. Chief Executive of Demos Helsinki, Juha Leppänen. In conversation with Senior Fellow at the Kresge Foundation, Jennifer Bradley.
So first, a quick question for all of you. Who among you was here at CityLab 1, first CityLab? Okay. Just means I'm old. One of the things that I want to start our panel talking about is, what did innovation look like 10 or 15 years ago when we started having conferences and conversations about city innovation? Juha?
No, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, and good to be here. So I think innovation around 10, 15 years ago was very much in pockets. It was within labs. It was within methodological disciplines. It was a bit disconnected from the civic innovation aspect as well. It was also quite technocratic and very technical in its premise, and also in the language that we use. So that's something that, to me, would be the aspects of innovation and the community of innovation 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I was one of the kind of kids of innovation in government a little over a decade ago, and for us it was really interesting that the narrative and kind of the mandate for us as a team was to use our technocratic data skills and evaluation skills to bypass the public sector. And that's a really interesting perspective. We were kind of told that to do anything in innovation, you had to avoid the bureaucracy, and I think that's shifted very dramatically now in a very positive way. So at the time, I think we were wrong in how we thought about innovation.
Sascha, you were a top innovator 10 years ago. I mean, you still are today, but.
So I think it was a bit of a fly-by-night operation. You know, you had these individuals who were self-appointing themselves sometimes as the kind of creative or innovation officer in cities. Some of them had an annual budget of $10,000 and would kind of dabble in all kinds of pilots and shop around to see if they could find a willing collaborator somewhere in a government department who would do a cool pilot with them. And there was no real thinking about how we get this into the bureaucracy, how we kind of anchor this in the actual operation of the city, where you had like 70,000 employees and one guy with a $10,000 budget. That didn't really move the needle all that much.
Got it. And so bring us to today. What does innovation look like today? Elizabeth, as a promoter and a professor of innovation, what are you telling people that you work with?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of excitement about different tools of innovation, and those tools change by the year. So, you know, maybe 10 years ago it was evaluation and data and behavioral science or human-centered design. Now we're talking about AI and other new tools. But I think the big shift has been thinking about innovation as a lens to public service delivery, as opposed to like a fun set of toys that we play with on the periphery of the public sector. So to me, that's really crucial. And if we're successful, then the language and the lens of innovation becomes part of the day-to-day practice of doing government, as opposed to something special on the side.
Okay. Sascha.
Yeah, I'm thinking as you're asking the question that I think innovation today, and certainly in my environment, is very much about getting equity and inclusion right. And that is just a very, very tough task ahead of us. But also I think it really forces us to think about much more diverse practices. There's no one size fits all for that. And I think that's the kind of edge we're now kind of stepping into, that kind of really thinking about how does everyone feel included and how do we avoid that we have this. And I think this is what happened, right? We had these really creative individuals 10 years ago. Now we have teams and administrations that embrace this more broadly. And now we're going outwards, right? And seeing how do we take everyone along on the ride.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I do think that there is a convergence of different disciplines and methods happening within the community, which is incredibly important. One way of looking at it, looking at where we are right now with innovation, is that there is an increasing recognition that the challenges that cities face are really complex, very holistic, very horizontal in nature, ranging from climate to care, which was discussed in the previous panel. And it just happens to be that there's a community of innovation leaders, people making innovation, working with innovation for the past 10, 15 years, that have been devising and coming up with approaches that now cities actually need more than ever before. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because then it really relates to what was said here before, that what in the end matters is how those new practices, new innovations are embedded into the structures, into the processes, into the culture of city administrations. And that's exactly the moment of time in which we are right now.
So I want to push you a little, because backstage you said something more provocative. You said innovation needs to be boring.
Yeah.
And that's where we are right now. So bore us.
Well, that's a fair push. I think, like, if you really think of public administrations and city processes, they are really technical and codified, and they are quite boring by design and by intent, because there's lots of things that need to be taken into consideration. That means that they are very difficult to change. So even if there is a really good innovative new practice, an idea, something on the ground, to be able to embed it into the public administration and into the machinery, into the core of city administration and government, it's really boring and really high labor-intensive work. So that basically is what I mean with innovation has to become boring right now.
So, Sascha, as somebody who has been in this space for a long time, and I think broadly agrees that innovation should be sort of distributed and not the, this is a US term, but like not the shiny object. How do you stay motivated? If innovation is now embedded and boring and institutional, what's the spark that keeps an innovator going?
Yeah, so first of all, when it gets boring, it actually starts to move the needle, right? So I think we're now seeing impact, and I think it's really an applause I would like to say for this whole community here that we've made it boring, meaning that it's being used and it's coming to fruition. And so I think for anyone who wants to see actual impact, our dream is now coming true, and then I have to admit I'm always thinking about like what's the next frontier we have to open. And I think it is the idea that everyone feels empowered to contribute to that. And I think that's kind of the field that's opening next, at least to me, where I'm thinking like, okay, if we can do the same, bring the same kind of energy into opening the next frontier, I think we will make that boring too, and that's going to be really incredible. So I think that's what motivates me, that seeing that this actually works and that this community can put it into action.
May I flip that on its side a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I agree. I couldn't agree more that it's the success and kind of all our dreams coming true if these things get boring. But another way to think about that is that there's a lot that's already happening in cities and in communities that sometimes it requires someone from the outside to come in and say, what you're doing is innovation. So it's not necessarily that those things weren't already happening, but to me, it's really exciting to go and work with some of our government partners who are, you talk to a frontline worker and they say, the process was taking too long, so now I changed how we ordered things, or we photocopy the paperwork differently. And things are easier for our residents. And it's really helpful, I think, to say that thing that you just do naturally because you care about your work and you are resident-oriented or user-centered, regardless. We call that innovation, and that's something to celebrate. And to me, that's kind of what the CityLab community does, to say the things that you do in your day-to-day practice to make things easier is innovation. It's not like a technical special skill that only some people can have. That's the nature of the work of trying to improve is innovation.
Yeah, quickly, because what makes it exciting, like just as a follow-up, I think it'll be because when you actually change how the machinery works, it is difficult, and every city is very, very different. So instead of trying to share methods or specific innovations and replicate in different cities, I think that the excitement comes from the fact that you start to learn together almost tactical imaginations in terms of how to actually push things in different contexts and within different cities. So, and I actually think that art of imagining tactically will be a source of a lot of excitement in the future.
So what I love about this panel is that we are situated in the context of conversations about care, about arts, so that innovation is just being presented as something that is a lot more humanistic, a lot less about technical tools, a lot less about importing particular structures and things from other disciplines. So let's imagine ourselves at CityLab 20, 10, 15 years out. What do you imagine innovation will look like then? And I understand with the caveat that what makes it an innovation is that we didn't see it ahead of time, but go with me. So Elizabeth.
Sure. I'm glad I get to go first on that question. For me, we're right at the point, and some people in the room are doing this already and have been doing it for years, but I think in 10 years, the day-to-day boring practice will be around how we bring in those who are most impacted by all of these changes into the process of co-design and innovation. So what I mean by that is, how do we really make sure that when we do community engagement, the people who participate in that community engagement represent the communities that are impacted? How do we bring in frontline workers into mayor's offices to co-design what works in terms of service delivery? And I hope that in 10 years, that's going to be expected and normal, and we will shame the innovators who don't co-design and bring in the voices of those who have been historically excluded. Well, that's my dream for the next 10 years.
Just to stay on that, are there places that you think are providing lights or models of how this is happening?
Well, I think there's actually a lot of cities who are doing this naturally. Again, it's more about naming things that have been happening for a long time. So if you talk to chief equity officers who have already built very strong networks with members of the community who don't already feel like they can come give their voice or hold their government accountable, it's happening. And I'm thinking of Kim Desmond, who did incredible work in Denver and is now doing incredible work in San Diego. There's a level of responsibility that the government can take in saying, like, we were part of the problem and now we're going to be part of the solution, that I think opens the doors for this. We heard it actually on the stage yesterday from chief resilience officers as well. And to me, that's the first step in opening the doors for what could be really exciting co-design and innovation.
Great. Okay, Juha, CityLab 2020, what are we talking about?
No, I completely agree.
Sorry, 20.
With Elizabeth on co-design. And I think we come to appreciate more that transformation must happen in piecemeal manner, and you can support that, you can learn, you can accumulate. There are exciting stories, from instance, from City of Utrecht in Europe in terms of service delivery reforms. I also think innovation will be much more political, like we embrace the political nature as we're trying to tackle our collective challenges together, and that's something for the community to learn. I also think that there are some specific topics that we need to embrace. So for instance, how we design institutions, how we revise institutions, which essentially are codifications of practice. So how to support that endeavor will be something that I would expect that CityLab 20 will be talking much more. And then finally, there are some issues that really all cities struggle with in different parts. For instance, on multi-level governance. So how cities engage with the regional, with national, how do those dialogues and feedback loops work is something that we need to learn and embrace as the community of innovators moving ahead.
Okay, Sascha, where?
Yeah, so I think, I hope, and I'm sure we will, be talking about what does it take to make everyone a co-creator, a change maker in your city. And I think that doesn't just mean what space do we give them, but it also means how do we develop their courage? How do we start at young age teaching children that they are encouraged to contribute and that we're not seeing them as the future potential, but the here and now. And I think if we begin to see our public services as touch points to build that self-efficacy, the belief I can contribute, that's one important part. And then we have to deliver on that courage, right? And deliver the agency that, yes, when I participate, something changes. Mm. And I really believe that in 10 years' time, we're going to sit here having that conversation and talk about how we've made that boring and really, really technical and operational. But I think right now that's the vision I think that I would hope us take forward.
Great. So we have 53 seconds. I'm going to ask you to give your parting tweet. What do you want folks to leave this room knowing about innovation and in the urban context? Juha?
Innovation is political and boring.
Okay. Tweet that, everybody. X that, I guess. We don't tweet anymore.
Innovation is about building trust with community.
Imagine yourself to the edge of your imagination. Who is the person you think cannot contribute to innovation? Where does that end, your imagination? And then focus on that one person and say they are fully capable to do expert innovation already now.
I can't think of a better way to end. Thank you so much.
Cars jumping, wheels they shining up. Everybody dressed up looking good.
Please welcome Senior Vice President of Building Bridges Across the River, Scott Kratz. Director of the Washington, D.C. Office of Planning, Anita Cozart. Executive Director of Friends of Anacostia Park, Richard Trent. With Managing Editor for Bloomberg CityLab, Nicole Flauto.
Good morning. Here in Washington, we are blessed with a lot of beautiful urban parks and green spaces. We're also plagued by some of the same problems that places around the country are facing now. They've become places that risk gentrifying a neighborhood. there's not enough of it in the places that need it, and they don't always serve the right people and the right purposes. Scott, you've been working for years now on the 11th Street Bridge, a pretty closely watched project here in Washington that many people are already viewing as kind of like the antidote to some of the problems that came with the High Line of bringing change to the neighborhood. Can you start by just giving us a high-level overview of the project for those who are familiar?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. So the 11th Street Bridge Park is a collaboration between the city, the District of Columbia, and the nonprofit that I work for, appropriately enough, named Building Bridges Across the River. And for those who might not be from DC, just a little geographic context. We have two rivers here in DC, the Potomac that everybody knows, but then we also have the Anacostia River. And the Anacostia River has been a dividing line for generations in this city. It's divided residents on either side of the river by race, by income, by even health outcomes. And here in the nation's capital, we've actually done one thing worse, where we've put not only a natural divide, but also a physical divide. We've put in not one, but two freeways on either side of the river, so further dividing both sides of the river. And the 11th Street Bridge Park attempts to address this by having this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when these old freeway bridges that were built in the 1960s came to the end of their lifespan and needed to be replaced. Instead of getting rid of all the old infrastructure, we, working with the city, looked at how do we extend the life of that initial infrastructure and transform it no longer into a freeway, but a community-driven civic space. And I think the important emphasis there is that phrase, community-driven. This project has been informed by over 1,000 meetings with the community, and even well before beginning the project, even before engaging an engineer or an architect, we spent over 2 years just talking to local residents about, should we do this? In essence, sort of asking for permission. And that's really critical because the communities that we're working with, there is a large and justifiable trust deficit. So making sure that we're at every step, this project's being driven by local residents has been really essential.
Yeah, so trust is something that Secretary Buttigieg just talked about this morning as well. And I think that's been one of the biggest challenges, as you point to. Can you talk about what have been some of the most important steps in terms of getting buy-in from the community?
Yeah, I think sometimes these projects begin with sort of the bright, shiny pictures. And I think it was really critical that for us, we took several steps back and went out and just sort of tested the waters and said, what do you think? Dumb idea, good idea? And we spent over 2 years talking to faith leaders, small businesses, civic associations, of asking if there was if there was any energy behind this. And only then did we say, all right, once we saw there was some enthusiasm for this project, what should be on the park? So we solicited ideas, the ideas like an environmental education center, performance space was the #1 idea that the community requested for programming on the park, urban agriculture for a community that has one grocery store serving 75,000 residents, huge food justice issue. We baked all of those ideas into an international design competition. And sometimes design competitions, as I was looking to similar design competitions around the country, the designers have no connection to the client, more or less the community, and that didn't make any sense. So we actually convened a group of about 36 stakeholders who participated as part of the design competition. They met with each of our 4 final design teams, and at the end of this 8-month process, it was the community, this group of stakeholders, that actually selected the designs for the park. So I think much of what we're trying to do, and this has been a common theme sort of throughout the 12 years that I've been leading the project, is how do we put the community, how do we put decision-making power back in the hands of local residents, right? How do we give true agency? As an example, I didn't get to vote when we selected the design team, the community did, right? But we're confident that the answers are already in the community. We just need to be listening very intentionally and very thoughtfully.
Yeah, and just to probe that slightly more, so how did you find the right people, right? So there's this kind of increasingly common understanding of the community meeting as the place where some people with a lot of time on their hands, sometimes, older white folks, will go regularly to meetings, but not necessarily the people that you're trying to reach. And how did you overcome that barrier?
I think #1 is you can't rush that process. The time is really critical, and at each of those sort of meetings that I had, first of all, before we engaged any big public meetings, it was really critical that we went to talk to some leaders in the community. And by leaders, I mean formal leaders, right? City council members, the ANC commissioners, but also the informal, the residents too, because no leader in a community wants to be the last person to hear about a significant investment like this. And at each of those meetings, I would end with, who else should I be speaking to, right? And so that led to these sort of 200 meetings. We also need to be inventive, I think, and make sure inventive and inclusive. And so we spent two weeks working with local youth, local teens, whose goal was to design the park, right? So I called in a lot of favors and brought in a lot of engineers and architects and planners to work with these young men and women. And at the end of 2 weeks, they had this amazing design for the park. And keep in mind, this is before we even did the design competition, right? So when we led the design competition, we kept pushing this amazing vision for the future users of the park from these young men and women. And one of the many reasons why we chose the design team of OMA and Olin, the design that we're going to be breaking ground next year, very exciting, was because they started their larger final presentation with the designs by these young men and women, right? Because those are the future users of the park, and they should be the ones to engage in the design of these kind of civic spaces.
Yeah, and you've invested a lot of resources into this space. Talk a little bit more about what that looks like, and also, if I were to look at a map of the bridge, what's kind of like the footprint around the bridge into the communities, about how those resources look and where they reach?
Yeah, we're focusing on a 10-minute walk shed, which is roughly about a mile around the park on either side, and we did this, I think, for one very important reason. When we were out talking to the community about what kind of programming should be on the park, we heard all these great ideas that we built into the design competition, but we heard a much deeper need. We heard a need for jobs, for affordable housing, for the preservation of Black-owned businesses, right? And I think it would have been easy at that point to say, well, okay, that's great, but we're building a park, right? But it was really critical that we opened the aperture and said, this is not only an opportunity to transform an old piece of aged out infrastructure into a park, but also think about these kind of projects in a very different way. So we spent a year right after we announced the design team winner in 2015, working with the city, working with local nonprofits, working with local community members and stakeholders to take a look at that 1 mile walk share around the park and think, how do we ensure that the thousands, tens of thousands of residents who helped shape this park from the beginning be the ones that benefit from it? In other words, how do we get ahead of issues of gentrification? And so we spent a year coming up with strategies in housing, workforce, small business, arts and culture strategies, focused in that 1 mile walk shed. And I won't go through all 34 strategies, but just to mention a couple. We've now seen 130 east of the river residents, renters, become homeowners who've gone through our Ward 8 Homebuyers Club. We've stood up the Douglas Community Land Trust. It's now its own separate 501c3 that has over 250 units of permanently affordable housing owned by the community. And we just graduated our 31st construction training program. Because if we're spending all this money to build the park, we want to make sure as much of those dollars go into local residents as possible. But to do that, we need to make sure local residents have the skill set and capacity to apply for and succeed at these jobs. So we now have 150 east of the river residents who are trained and employed in construction jobs. So next spring, when we break ground, if the general contractor comes to us and says, well, I can't find any local residents, we can say, well, here's a list of 150 people, right, that are already employed in the construction trades. Try again a little harder. Finally, to date, we've invested over $86 million in these equitable development strategies, which exceed the bricks and mortar of building the park. And by the time the park opens in 2026, we'll have been investing in these strategies for a decade, right? It's that sort of level of intentionality, thinking about this work really early and putting the community at the center that's been key to that success.
Richard, you work with a sprawling park, the Anacostia Park, right on the one side of this bridge, which of course hasn't yet broken ground, but is coming. First give us an overview of that park, how sprawling it is, a little bit about the history, and then we'll talk about its relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been energizing to hear from everyone else that's been participating in these panels, because you recognize that although our cities are very unique, the legacy of disinvestment, especially in urban BIPOC communities across our cities, is all too familiar and very similar. Same as in Anacostia and Anacostia Park, where you've got this gorgeous, unique park, 1,200 acres, larger than Central Park, stretching for 5 miles along the Anacostia River. The only National Park Service property with a skating pavilion, by the way. So a super unique park, right? But also, as Scott alluded to, an interstate built directly on the eastern side of it that separated 155,000 mostly black residents from this natural treasure in their backyard. A planning process that cut black and brown folks out of the visioning of their own space. And so the National Park Foundation, visionary leadership under Tara Morrison at the National Park Service, some committed philanthropies, K. Fritz Foundation, Conservation Fund, had the vision to start working with local community members to ground truth and agenda for a wholly community-owned friends group, right? So this started with barbecues, cookouts, skating parties, fishing by the river, just asking residents what they wanted to see in a conservation group, and really starting to answer this question: could the revitalization of an urban park be tethered to the uplift of the surrounding community? So residents told us they wanted jobs to come out of this. So the first thing that we did was create a green workforce development program. You see on the screen, that's Wayne Parker, who's from the community, leads maintenance and grounds in Anacostia Park. So now you've got residents actually leading the conservation and revitalization charge in this sort of long withering national park. But residents also said that they wanted a safe space that was healing, that could help unite families. So we program concerts and activities and creative placemaking efforts that unite the community. And then we also heard from newer residents of Anacostia that they wanted ways to connect with legacy residents in ways that weren't forced. And so we really put a lot of energy into facilitating these activations in the park that really serve as kind of one of the last few third spaces in DC where residents new and old can come together in really exciting and organic ways.
It's a lot of responsibility to put on a park. Can you talk about the relationship between Anacostia Park and the 11th Street, and particularly when it comes to resources and funding, how that's affected you?
Yeah. As the executive director for, I guess we're still a grassroots organization. You recognize that, capital ends up flowing like kind of popular high school students, like moving in very predictable ways, and it's like you want it to be like the guidance counselor that's like checking in on everybody, right? And so I think what's exciting about the 11th Street Bridge Park is through their equitable development plan, through the largest cash grant program I think ever, is that right?
Unconditional cash transfer.
Unconditional.
Yeah.
So they're democratizing capital flows east of the river in DC in ways that we haven't really seen before. And so it's a recognition that equity is an ecosystem, right? It's not just one brand spanking new project. It's organizations like ours that port into a lot of the work that they do and vice versa. And so when you recognize that everyone is kind of connected and you can distribute capital accordingly, it really, really makes a huge difference in terms of the sustainability of these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back to the national role of your organization. So your organization is called Friends of Anacostia Park, and there are a number of other friends groups like that who have kind of a conservation mission. Talk about how you think about your mission.
Yeah, so for the longest time, conservation and environmentalism has focused squarely on we've got to save this species, or we've got to protect this, this patch of land, which is fine. I'm not trying to yuck anyone's yum in that regard. But what's become abundantly clear, especially as it pertains to urban parks, is that the health of the conservationists matter just as much as the conservation effort itself. So we feel like the work that we're doing through green workforce development, through these creative placemaking strategies, are lifting up the folks who are actually going to be the stewards of these urban parks. And it expands, I think, our traditional understanding of what conservation and environmentalism actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. Anita, you were in the planning department, and so your role is to be the sort of government official, as both of these folks have nonprofits, if that wasn't clear. Talk about your role in these projects and how it relates to the goals of the planning department.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. One of the things that's important for us to contribute to this conversation is to really set this in a larger context about the importance of parks to the wellness and well-being and longevity of our communities, right? And so one of the things that we contribute is really thinking about the importance of telling stories in our parks, in our plazas, our streets, our sidewalks, and we do that through commemoration and commemorative works. And you see on the screen here a commemoration for a famous son of DC exemplar musician Marvin Gaye. And what's really important about thinking about the contributions is how there are some inequities that exist, right? If you think about Washington as a place of monuments, who are we memorializing? And recognizing that there's inequities in that, one of the things that we're doing is partnering with community-based organizations in Ward 7 and 8, east of the river, really to think about what stories we tell, who we commemorate, who we lift up in our public spaces, in our parks. There was an excellent meeting last evening, lively, full of arts and ideas about how to commemorate, and so through our partnership around that, we're bringing expert designers to partner with the community to realize some of those visions. And we're excited about that as well. Another contribution that we make is really understanding that even in having community festivals and outdoor events in our public spaces, in our parks, there's inequities in the capacity, financial and social, that people have. And so through our City, Our Spaces project, fingers crossed, in 2024, we'll be able to, or residents will be able to take out on loan AstroTurf, generators, and all kinds of seating and all kinds of other infrastructure that you can use to have your own community festival. And we're also investigating ways that we can break down some of the red tape around holding those festivals. Another piece is really recognizing that the district is often ranked highly in the nation for our parks, the quality of our parks, the scale of our parks, but as Scott and Richard have attested to, there's inequities that relate to that. And so through the excellent leadership of our Parks and Recreation Department, there's a Ready to Play initiative that's really going to invest in parks east of the river, including Poplar Point and also Kenilworth, really thinking about how we can make and reclaim the waterfronts that we had turned our backs on in the past.
Thank you. What do you see as your role in some of these kind of nonprofit efforts and how you can support them or bring them together?
So a key part of it is where we can, helping to smooth the pathway for some of these projects, right? There's incredible amounts of work that Scott and Richard have to do with national or federal partners, and where we can, we continue to push and advocate for projects to be signature projects in the district. We also make sure that we kind of bring our agency partners together to be able to find the best ways and best ideas that complement this work. And then the other piece is just being on panels like this and championing the great work and the great leadership of folks like Scott and Richard and the thousands of people that they work with every day.
Yeah. And how do you think about spaces that people might not think of as traditional parks in terms of, you know, different kinds of green spaces that you're providing to people?
Right. So one project that we're really proud of is our work on the Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast. So this is not where we are today. This is also east of the river and east of the Sousa Bridge. And as we talk to the residents there, predominantly Black, really understanding that difference between where we are here, physically in this building, and that community. Being within walking distance of the waterfront, but having such barriers, including the highways, but also highly trafficked roadways. We heard Secretary Pete talk about Vision Zero and the importance of being able to move safely through the community. So really thinking about how to reclaim some of the streets and street right-of-way for civic plazas and park spaces that people can enjoy that are important complement to the investments that we make in places like Anacostia Park. Here, Pennsylvania Avenue at Minnesota Avenue is just walking distance from Anacostia Park, and so making sure that there are stopover points for people in the community as they're enjoying our parks and civic spaces.
Richard, coming back to you for a minute, as we mentioned, construction hasn't even broken ground yet on the 11th Street Bridge, but as that happens, to the extent that people do start coming to Anacostia Park more than before, hopefully in the right ways, how do you think about your park's role in kind of the potential of gentrification?
Yeah, so gentrification, it happens kind of on two planes, right? There's the economic dimension, and then there's the socio-cultural dimension. So we feel like organizations like ours that are poised to direct a lot of our operating revenue specifically towards green job creation, that's a huge piece of it, right? And the 50 or so employment opportunities that we've created in the last 2 years won't be the panacea for all of Anacostia's socioeconomic challenges. But imagine if more nonprofits took this organizational model, essentially, right, of really deputizing citizens to do important work and scaling that. It wouldn't just be us doing it, right? It'd be a lot more nonprofits east of the river, and then you start to see a kind of a multiplicative effect. For the sociocultural piece, gentrification happens also with the changing of names for neighborhoods and changing of faces and forgetting the champions of community. We feel like a lot of the creative placemaking, concerts, activations that we're doing, again, are bringing new residents and old residents together in a way that helps new residents like my wife and I at Anacostia understand who were the champions before we arrived. So you come correct, right, when you show up to these new neighborhoods, and it's not just like grafting your traditions onto something that was already vibrant before you got there.
Well, thank you. I think that's a perfect place to end.
Now, artist and co-founder of No Kings Collective, Brandon Hill, in conversation with Senior Program Manager for the Arts at the Aspen Institute, Kaylee Bryant-Greenwell.
Sorry, guys.
So, Brandon.
Hey.
Hi.
What's up, guys?
Good morning. I want to start off at the top. Being a public artist, what questions are you solving for? Why work with cities as your canvas?
Yeah, like I've been doing this a long time. I think I have a studio practice, and I like the public art side. I think the first part is really just scale. You just have to figure out how to get something large, and I think when it's all done, no one really saw how it happened, so it's just up. And I think in real life and in real time, part of your brain is on this art side trying to create, like a really cool piece. Then the other, you have to kind of turn that part of your brain off and turn on the science and math part of your brain and try to figure out how to get this thing, at scale. It's 80 feet, if it's windy, if it's gonna rain on you, if it's gonna, really everything. And so I think that when you kind of click into that mode, it's a little different because you're just out in public. So, if you know the stereotypical artist, you're in your cave and you're kind of working on your stuff until you're like the world's good and ready. And, you're not sleeping, not eating. But, the minute you start a piece in the public, it's already ugly. It's out there, there's
Eyes
people
are on it.
saying you missed the spot or like, I don't know, I liked it before. And so that kind of humbles you really, really quickly. And it's just it's visceral. Like you're just out there, you're touching the brick, you're literal birds flying past you. And you're just out there. And I think it's different because I think when I'm in my fine art mode, things are precious. So if I was in a gallery, this seat might be a piece of art and someone yelling at you that you can't sit down. But in the world, if you paint a basketball court, kids are playing on it immediately. So you're kind of seeing your stuff in real life being used, played on. And I think in real life, we are reacting to the stuff that we see on the street. You know, like it's the stuff that we can go to. And so I would say that's like the biggest kind of difference. Yeah.
And I know as a public artist, you have to engage with questions of permanence, of the impromptu, but also questions of community in ways that other fine artists don't necessarily have to consider. I know that you've had impacts on occupancy in the projects that you've worked in, and I just want to ask, how does community show up in your work?
So like, how do I answer this? Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're just exposed. You're out there, so people have questions, and you got to answer them, and you can't kind of be wishy-washy about it. So I think, like, as my career's progressed, like, you get really, really, really good at trying to think as far as you possibly can, because, you know, it's not a jingle, so it's not going to come on and off the radio, right? You may have to look at this 10 years, 20 years from now, so you have to kind of be as forward-thinking as possible. And honestly, just make yourself as available as possible to be able to answer questions and then try to be as mindful of where you are. Because it's not a statue where, you know, bong, you know, this statue, this person's going to be here. But it is permanent, so people will have questions even years later. Why did you do this? What was this meaning? Why? How does this relate to the area? So that's kind of like the forward thinking. And that's something I think in my early career, I wouldn't even care. I would paint a skateboard and put it up and sell it and say, you know, cuz. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to talk about one of your specific projects.
Sure.
I wanted to talk to you about Whitman Walker.
Yeah.
If you have a slide you'd like to show us.
Yeah, so I think actually we're all looking at it. Yeah, so Whitman Walker it's like one of my favorite projects I've ever done. This is between Riggs and R on 14th Street in DC. It was.
Mm-hmm.
So they were transitioning from their old building to their new campus in Southeast, and they're one of the first LGBTQ specific health centers in the nation in the 80s. Elizabeth Taylor gave them the original money to, you know, buy the buildings, and so it was a series of 3 buildings. They merged interior, but they were on their way out, and so, you know, one of the original partners we talked to, this Abby Fenton, Joel Addy, and Dan Kaplan. So. For anyone that's in DC, across the street there's a condo, and that condo is a very expensive condo, and it says "Come all ye," because it used to be a homeless shelter, but I think for historic preservation reasons they were forced to keep the sign. So I guess it's "Come all ye" unless you ain't got money. And I think they were really mindful that they didn't want to kind of tell this other, you know, an additional wrecking ball story, especially with something as meaningful as Whitman Walker. So we kind of came in and, you know, sometimes I'm kind of in my art mode and I'm like, you know, I'm gonna paint a dolphin, so I'm gonna paint a dolphin. But for this, it was more reactive to, I think, what, you know, it's 40 years of history. And, you know, they were out front when, you know, the taboo was taboo. And so I was like, okay, you need something, you know, we gotta do something bigger than this. So they originally asked for about 20 feet. And so, you know, I kind of, you know, got on paper, drew, talked to my business partner, Peter, at the time, and I was like, hey, we're just gonna paint the entire block. So we reached out to our sponsors at Sherwin-Williams, got them to kind of donate paint, and then we thought of the entire site as a project, even though we knew they were going to demolish it. Mm-hmm. We just thought that by putting that much attention on the building, we'd be able to help their already really stellar marketing campaign kind of tell their story and tell the transition. So we were just like, yeah, let's paint the block. And I think one of the things they told me in the first meeting was that they referred to it as the beige maze. So the idea was like, let's just, you know, we cover the building, it's one building now. Mm-hmm. And so the parking lot was still actually active at the time. There's a Baptist church behind that still used it. So it was kind of cool to do something that is, again, precious, but it's still functional. Yeah, so we actually put up a website, did something like 14 events on that parking lot, and just kind of made it like an actual, you know, just kind of turned into a larger thing in the sum of its parts. Which I like because it's not so formal, and then you do a thing, and then people just kind of, you know, you would show up, somebody would just hop the fence, and there was a one-table dinner, or just, you know, just random stuff would happen there. But, you know, I like the idea that you can do something that's just, this was a nothing parking lot and a nothing wall that no one was looking at. And then after, there's people just kind of, they're just attracted to wanting to chill on it. And yeah, that was the sexiest demolition I've ever seen. So it was kind of cool to see it come down to. And that's the current building, which they're also still partners with the building that's up. Yeah.
And I think, well, that brings us right to inflection point. So as a public artist, you are thinking about community, you're thinking about meaning and how you're expressing that in a public way. And I think that inflection point is really a great example of this the power of public art. There's a lot of meaning. So if you would unpack it a little for us.
Yeah, so it was cool. I mean, honestly, I hadn't even seen this building until I walked in yesterday. I was like, oh, there's like, everywhere. But yeah, when I was designing the work for the conference, and big shout out to Elle if he's in here. I'm a nerd, so I was like, there's a lot of science terms that make their way into the boardroom, and then no one really knows what it means. And the next thing you know, you're circling back, talking next steps and double clicking things. So, and I'm really solidly on the art side, but I'm on a random Zoom call, so I get sucked into some people's boardrooms. And I was like, I read in the opening information they sent me, one of the topics was inflection points. And I was like, I don't even know what the hell that means. So I looked it up. And so it's scientifically, or in science, it's actually where, the point of a curve, switches to, where the concave goes to the convex. And I thought socially, it's easier to look back and understand where something changed, but in real time, we actually kind of may not know. And so it's kind of, I just wanted to be conscious of, okay, well, are we on the other side already, or what's your personal responsibility on the other side? And so in thinking about the inflection point, we are in inflection points simultaneously. So Black Lives Matter was happening during, Stop Asian Hate, which is happening during, it's post Me Too, so we're kind of in intersecting movements that, are all progressing together. So then when I thought about movement, literal movement, and when I thought about movements, I said, it'd be cool to kind of think about the way you have a sneaker colorway. What if I actually just sampled colors from movements? Mm-hmm. And, a lot of these things, so this is Stonewall riots, the bus that, Rosa Parks was arrested on. I was like, look, these are black and white photos. When I actually looked it up, I was like, oh, snap, this is it's a cool little color. Let me find this, let me sample this bus. I'm gonna sample this protest. I'm gonna sample, all these things, and I'm gonna put it into the piece. Because I did want something so, abstract, colorful, but I wanted to be able to defend the entire piece. And so that was kind of where that colorway came from. And so I just built out one last thing. It wasn't a movement. I'm from Baltimore. I live in DC. I've been here for about 10 years. But I remembered, I went to a conference, and I remember it was an urban planner showing the difference between kind of assembling and loitering. And, they showed, it was a bunch of black kids on one side, they were loitering, it was other kids on the other side. It was kind of, they were just playing. And so I thought about how, if anyone knows Baltimore, your stair steps referred to as a stoop. It's kind of the porch, so everything's outside, and you sit there, and I chilled. I've eaten crabs, it's a very part of Baltimore, but it's also literally how you move in and out of a building. And so I kind of, so I think that layered approach, triple entendre, I wanted to kind of put all of that into this, and literally distill out what are movements, what are inflection points, and kind of also how to be forward thinking about not trying to. We're talking city, so how not to build in a stupid mistake that, 50 years later, we all have to suffer from. So, yeah.
I think that's a great point to land on, the inflection point. Thank you.
Please welcome Audience Development Manager and Co-Curator at the St. Louis Art Museum, Andrea Purnell, Co-Founder of We Act Radio, Kimone Freeman, Executive Vice President of Campaigns and Advocacy at Hip Hop Caucus, Tanya Clayhouse, and the Mayor of Newark, New Jersey, USA, Ross J. Baraka, with host and hip hop staff writer at NPR Music, Rodney Carmichael.
Well, if you're feeling on right and you think you're on. Somebody let me know. Will everybody in the place put a whistle in your face? Scream it out and say, yo, hit it. You don't stop, or rock the rhythm that makes your finger pop. I said hip hop, but thanks a lot. Come on, everybody, give me what you got. I'm gonna tell you a little story about the Sugar Hill Gang with the pow pow boogie and a big bang bang.
They call themselves writers because that's what they do. They write their names, among other things, everywhere. Names they've been given or have chosen for themselves. Most of all, they write in and on subway trains, which carry their names from one end of the city to the other. It's called bombing. And it has equally assertive counterparts in rap music and breakdancing.
Screaming out and say, I am somebody, somebody.
Graffiti writing in New York is a vocation. Its traditions are handed down from one youthful generation to the next. To some, it's art. To most people, however, it is a plague that never ends. A symbol that we've lost control.
I'm Detective Bernie Jacobs. I, in conjunction with my partner, Detective Jim McHugh, are the crime prevention coordinators for the New York City Transit Police Department. Graffiti, as the name itself, is not an art. Graffiti is the application of a medium to a surface. I will show you graffiti, such as the letters on the end of that car directly in back of me. Is that an art form? I don't know. I'm not an art critic. But I can sure as hell tell you that that's a crime.
Not art, it's a crime.
Relationship issues.
That was great.
Yeah. Now this scene is from the documentary Style Wars, released in 1983, 10 years after the birth of hip hop. And I think it really offers a snapshot of the complex relationship between hip hop and the cities that it came from, that it's always come from. Now contrast that scene with the celebration of hip hop's 50th anniversary last month at Vice President Kamala Harris's residence right here in DC, where she called hip hop one of America's greatest exports, right? From censored to celebrated, that's a hell of a leap. Greetings everybody, my name is Rodney Carmichael. I cover hip hop at NPR and formerly hosted the podcast Louder Than a Riot. And I know we've had some big thinkers in the house this week, but I can guarantee you that nobody thinks about the politics of place, space, and race like hip-hoppers. And no genre in the history of recorded music has challenged, branded, or represented American cities bigger and better than hip-hop has. And joining me are some heavy hitters who embody that spirit. We have Tanya Clayhouse of the Hip Hop Caucus. We have Kamon Freeman of WEAC Radio. We have Andrea Purnell of St. Louis Art Museum, and the real hip hop mayor himself, Newark Mayor Ras Baraka. Now, hopefully we understand by now that rap is the most consumed genre in the nation. America loves hip hop and apple pie, so on and so forth. That's the popular narrative. But America does not always love or listen to the communities that give voice to hip hop. You know, so what are we missing, first of all? I'm curious from everybody on the panel, as city leaders, as big thinkers, as problem solvers, what are we missing when we turn a deaf ear to the communities that are hip hop, Black and brown communities specifically?
I'll start out.
Okay.
So we're missing the story. Hip hop has traditionally, historically, been about telling our story in our communities. It's about what's happening. It's about how it is that we're surviving. And so when we're not listening, we're not paying attention to the artists and what they're talking about, we're missing what's happening right next door. Hip hop is a movement. It's not simply static. It's evolving. It always has been. and it evolves with what's happening in our everyday society. And so at the Hip Hop Caucus, that's what we always talk about, that if you're going to engage with us, then you need to understand who you're engaging with, how to engage with them, and how to respect what it is that people are trying to tell you. You may not like it. You may not appreciate it, understand, or think it's art. That's okay. It still is. And it's what it is, and it is a representation of what's happening in our communities. Now, if we want that to change, then we have to be about making that change and engaging with those that are in the movement. But they all are intertwined. And that's what we're missing if we don't listen. We're not hearing our story.
I think we're missing the power that hip hop has. I think the name of this panel could easily have been from condemnation to celebration. Because what you just saw there was him criminalizing an art form, right? And then he admitted that he's not an artist. So I think a lot of people, the gatekeepers, are not artists and are critiquing what art is. But now in almost every city, we see public art installations. We see Bloomberg, one of their largest global projects was how these public art installations actually save lives in traffic fatalities, and that paint has actually created a safer, more vibrant community. And hip hop had a lot to do with that. And I don't think we take enough credit for it. I don't think we acknowledge our power. I think the great writer Alice Walker says it best, you know, the greatest power is convincing people they don't have any. Hip hop wasn't supposed to be here. It was created in South Bronx, and you don't know if you really looked at the scene and that environment, that was like Gaza-like conditions. And it came out of that, and now it's the biggest musical genre in the world.
I agree with what's been said, and will also add a level of authenticity is missing. You know, I loved the opening clip, and I am from, you know, an art museum, from arts and culture space, and I'm here to say that hip hop is indeed art. So much so that we created an entire exhibition, you know, around the subject matter, you know, looking at how art has influenced, hip hop has influenced specifically contemporary art in the last 21st century. So it's a movement, you know, it is undeniable, a phenomenal art form that is continuing to evolve.
Well, I would imagine that people are at least a lot more elevated than they were when that video or documentary was done. Hip hop is 50 years old. That means there are people's grandchildren, mothers, families that have gone through this generationally. You can go to anywhere in the world, whether you're in Eastern Europe or China or deep in the continent of Africa or the Caribbean, and see people freestyling or breakdancing or imitating or, you know, furthering what was created in the South Bronx out of a condition of poverty, of neglect, of inequity that people used really to put their voices out there and became as creative as possible to allow themselves to be heard, and then to monetize that at the same time. Because people know that art and culture is not just a social phenomenon, it's also an economic and political one. Yeah. So there are whole groups or industries created because of art and culture, and specifically hip hop. So if we do not understand that and see that, then we're missing opportunities to develop our communities economically, to engage sectors of our city and parts of our community that are not engaged politically. We're missing opportunities to create that bridge, to bring a lot of people into government, number one, into politics, and to create the economic engine that you need in your city. You're missing out completely if you don't tap into that.
Now, Mayor, the first time I heard your voice, and maybe true for a lot of people, was on the Lauryn Hill's classic album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. 25 years old this year. You were the educator in the interludes throughout that album. And in a lot of ways, I think you define those scenes in your classroom, help define not only the album, but Newark for me. You know, I'm from Atlanta. I was a long way away, but I saw a reality and a worldview through those interludes and you dealing with your students. In some ways, I'm curious, just as a lead into my next question, like, in what ways would you say that hip hop has kind of shaped or branded, which is kind of what you're talking about, the identity of Newark and you all's respective cities, be it culturally, politically, or even economic identity?
Well, number one, the importance of art and culture and the necessity of it to reinvigorate a city, to develop it economically, to reach out to people socially, as I was saying earlier, is an opportunity that we do not miss. And I think that comes from being immersed in hip hop culture and growing up and understanding the connectivity of all of those things and why it's necessary to have a relationship. We use hip hop to help us reduce violence and crime in 24 hours apiece. We use hip hop as a way to get people to come to City Hall and have open mics and talk about issues and political things that are going on in the city. We use hip hop to, create artists exhibits and murals across the city, right, to bring people out, wanting to engage them in politics, but create opportunity for people to come downtown or come in parts of the city that they haven't been in before. So we use it in many different ways. And then ultimately, for me, it kind of informs the way you govern, because you know the inequities that exist in this country, in the world, in your city specifically, that there are voices that need to be reached out to, people that you need to build bridges for. And so you kind of govern in that capacity to try to make sure you create platforms for people. So if you don't want people scribbling on the walls, then you have to create opportunity for people to do it in a much better and more visual and inviting way. And my father would say when we were younger, people write on the walls because the walls are ignorant. And so it would seem to me that there's something that people have to say. And people who want people to know their name are people who feel invisible. So how do you make people feel visible so writing their name is not the most thing they get out of this, that they want to do more than that, and we create an opportunity for more to actually take place.
I love that. It also reminds me of making your mark, on your city. I'll just use St. Louis as an example. Many don't realize how connected St. Louis, in fact, is to hip hop, very much so an epicenter, if you will. St. Louis was, in fact, the first radio station to ever play hip hop in the country, right? So being able to hold that mark, as something that is so meaningful is incredible. So hip hop gives cities a chance to be known for so many things, but their contributions.
Hip hop is a constituency now. Politicians use that constituency to get elected. It's a power block that you can activate if you know how, but I think sometimes we miss the communication and the engagement that you're talking about. Tanya, I'm curious, is hip hop as a culture, as a community, being engaged enough? And if not, how should we be going about doing that?
It's a big question. I think that it's being engaged by some on a very cursory level in order just to seem as if they fit in, to make them feel, no pun intended, hip. However, hip hop is naturally disruptive. Hip hop was created in order to talk about what's happening in our communities, the change. Hip hop was about talking about Johnny who was killed on the streets by the police, talking about a grandmother who was dying because of cancer that is infecting their soil as a result of the toxins in their communities. Hip hop was created because of talking about the gun violence in their communities, talking about the lack of education. So when people bring up and use the music as a background, they need to make sure that they're actually explaining the meaning behind it and not just bouncing to the beats. because that's what hip hop is about, truly. And so, no, I don't feel that everyone is using hip hop in the way that it should be. In fact, I think they're using it in order to advance their own agenda, which may not necessarily be the agenda of those that they're talking about. This is why you hear of those many saying, don't use my music with your politics, because that's not what I'm talking about. That means they don't understand what's going on. And so that's what we keep saying at the caucus, is that you have to engage and really understand what the community is about, go to where they are, and if you know that, then you know when it is to use and how to bring in the music, and how to bring in the culture, how to bring in the fashion, how to bring in the art, the artistry, all of that and above. But to answer your question, yes and no, I think there's much more that can be done, and that's what we want to keep doing as we're working throughout the community, because this is about racial and socioeconomic justice.
Right. I want to co-sign on that. Chuck D famously said that hip-hop is Black America's CNN.
Right.
But I think we've kind of lost a step in our political advocacies. You know, what we have now is a version that's more acceptable to the state. That's why you see the vice president having a party, and during the Barack Obama years, it was a common reoccurrence. But was no real advocacy in that music. We don't have a public enemy anymore. You know, I think Dead Prez is about to come out with another album. I'm excited about that. Right. But we have to have something that reinforces our narrative, you know. And again, I don't think we're claiming our power. You know, if you can go watch They Clone Tyrone, and you see how they use the frequency, you know, and changed. I don't know if you guys saw that, but you need to check that out. You know, they changed the frequency, and the brothers was fighting, then they started hugging each other.
Right.
Now, it was a club scene that was monotonous music was playing to brainwash them. Cambridge University just released a study to show how hip hop actually improves brain function. But if you understand the frequencies, you can manipulate that, and I think it has been manipulated. You know, right now, the world's most famous Palestinian is DJ Khaled.
That's right.
And he is mute on a lot of important issues. And just imagine what would happen if he wore a Palestinian Lives Matter t-shirt. He said, ceasefire. You know, if for every casualty on both sides, he was like, there's another one, and another one, you know. He would change the whole narrative single-handedly. And he could do something with Drake, who's Jewish, you know. But that's not acceptable to the state, and they're more content with being, you know, enjoying the fruits of their labor from our audience of people who have a frequency that's been acceptable to the state.
That's really a great point, because the international capacity of hip hop is so underrated that there are hip hop artists probably in every culture you can imagine on the planet in multiple languages who communicate through the music and through the art form, who have an opportunity to discuss and talk high level on issues that are affecting their lives in their communities right now, in all parts of the world, and talk about that through the music. And I think the vice president was right. This is America's greatest export, but it's being used to sell clothes and sneakers and jewelry and diamonds and cars, to sell material as opposed to the ideas that created the music in the first place. And if we gave this forum an opportunity to talk about those ideas, I think some of the issues that we're dealing with politically and socially become easier for us to solve and engage and confront, as was pointed out. And I think we need to allow that to actually happen.
Andrea, I want to end on this exhibit, The Culture, that you co-curated at St. Louis Art Museum. I believe we may have some slides that start pulling up. And this exhibit examines hip hop's ability to create alternate systems of power, which is what we're talking about. I'm really curious, because we know the relationship between hip hop and, you know, the contemporary visual art has not always, has been fraught sometimes, just like what we're talking about in every other area of life. Was this exhibit a hard sell for the museum?
I don't know about a hard sale, but I will say the idea of, a white cube space, introducing hip hop was very unique for perhaps our core audience. So if you slide through, you can see a few more of the images, thinking about ceramics, with Biggie Smalls and, Tupac Shakur with beading literally on his bandana. You can continue to slide through, and Toshabalala's self is representing Little Kim, in such a way. And these are life-size works. They're pretty massive. Zepolito, we see Brand, of course, with Fubu. We're being introduced to the do-rag. So again, for traditional museum goers, this may not necessarily be, what they're thinking they're going to come in and experience, but they are finding themselves in the art, which is what it's all about. We think of graffiti, which is one of the pillars of hip hop, literally a language. As we continue, you're seeing, this being expressed in this work. Not only the graffiti and the tagging, but the Japanese histories being presented here, connections to community, as this artist allows his friends in the Boyle Heights neighborhood to literally tag the work. So you're having community have their say, in the art making. And especially this work, Adrian Octavius Walker, who is from St. Louis, has remixed, if you will, reimagined A Great Day in Harlem, A Great Day in Hip Hop, originally done by Art Kane in the late 50s that looked at jazz artists. And then Gordon Parks assembled in 1998, 177 of hip hop's finest. And then in 2022, Adrian assembled St. Louis's finest. So this idea of, community being brought into the museum, into the space, a part of the celebration, has been core to the experience, really core to us as a curatorial team, to make sure that their voice was included, had a say, was important, and was indeed heard.
Okay. Now, in the spirit of hip hop being disruptive, I know our time has ended, but I want to get one more question in, if possible. One thing that's really interesting to me, and that I write about in my work and a lot, is this huge disconnect between the economic disparity and disadvantage that hip hop hoods suffer, and the wealth, the technical innovation, the global branding that these same communities create. So in thinking about hip hop going forward and the future and bringing a little Afrofuturism into the conversation, how can we truly bridge that gap? What is needed? Is it a paradigm shift, or why are our communities considered disadvantaged when they're creating all this wealth for everybody, it seems, except for the community? How do we figure that out?
I think because we are often the creators, but we are very often not the owners. And you start out being disadvantaged when you don't recognize your value and you are not able to have equity in your work. When you look at a lot of the Hip Hop 50 celebrations, a lot of those celebrations weren't produced by hip hop artists or hip hop organizations or people that's directly connected with culture. It was corporations who see the vitality from that, and they choose who is going to be on there. And they choose. I remember Special Ed was saying that he turned it down because they wasn't paying enough. Because you were old school, you're not current, so they thought we can get you at a discount. Yeah. We got to recognize that value. So it's about having control of your art form, and we often lose control of our art forms. And I think that until that changes, we'll still see more of the same.
Yeah.
All right.
Thinking of a master plan. Ain't nothing but sweat inside my hand. Dig into my pocket, all my money is spent. I dig deeper, still coming up with lint. So I start the mission thinking how I get some more dead presidents, right? That's Rakim. God. Talking about his, quest to get resources and money, and prayerfully the rap that he's doing is leading them in that direction. And our struggles here in America and all over the world as people who have been dispossessed of their things, in a position of power but powerlessness, trying to fight for our ability to be seen, to be heard, to take care of our families, our communities. At the same time, I think hip hop represents that legacy of those things in a very upfront, in-your-face way that some people can't deal with. But the reality is, it really explains our condition and our desire to be treated as other human beings and to be able to take care of ourselves like other human beings.
I would co-sign on that and just add that that's why we've got to ensure that we're about helping each other in the community. We have to support one another. If we don't, who is? And as you were just saying, that most create, but we're not owning. We don't own the production. We don't own the distribution. We don't own the redistribution. That is where all of the economic vitality is coming from. And so it's about economic justice in our society. And we know as a community that we have been pushed, that we have been oppressed, particularly in the Black community, and that coming together is not necessarily as in, something that we have been accustomed to in a way in this society. It does not contribute to us being able to support one another. So we have to take our power back and recognize that this is our power, that the hip hop culture is our power, and recognize what that means, and then support one another in that. And so that's why we have to be sure to take back that narrative, not let others own the narrative of who we are, not let others tell us what hip hop should be about and how it can be distributed. Let us be the ones who are telling our narrative so that we can retain our power and be the ones that are about actually making the change and uplifting our own communities for Black liberation.
All right. And with that part, I think we're good. Thank y'all. Thank you, panel. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Happy hip hop, everybody.
And now, please welcome to the stage from Bloomberg Philanthropies, Courtney Greenwald, and from the Aspen Institute, Bumi Akinusutu.
Hello, I'm Courtney from Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we are just out here to say thank you before we send you all home to your cities around the world to hopefully take all of the lessons that you learned here this past few days and the energy that I hope you got from being together. So thank you for coming. We're so happy to have you.
I'm Bumi Akinusutu of the Aspen Institute, and we want to thank Bloomberg Philanthropies for this amazing partnership, for this amazing event. And it would not be successful without all of you all, without our production team, without even the staff who, give it up for the production team.
So we want to say thank you to our partners at Aspen. Thank you to the Bloomberg Philanthropies Government Innovation Team. I see you guys all here. Thank you to the events team, to Production Glue, to the staff at the Waldorf. Thank you guys so much.
Yes,
and
absolutely. We'll see you next year.